Hi, welcome to the MICROJIG shop. My name is Morgan, and today we're going to be looking at some of the features and functions of the new Dado Stop Pro. Okay, so inside the box you're going to find one dado stop, one dovetail clamp, a setup gauge, and the instructions manual. Make sure that whenever your hands are near the blade, whether you're changing the blade or calibrating your rip fence, that you unplug your saw, always. Now let's have a look at the dado stop. This nifty little tool has two very important functions, one of which, of course, is cutting dados. The second is that you can also use this to calibrate the scale on your rip fence. Let's go ahead and start by calibrating our fence scale with a dado stop. Now, leg one of the dado stop is exactly 3 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our fence over, secure the dado stop to the fence with a dovetail clamp right at the front of the blade. Make sure that both the second and third legs are back behind leg number one. So you're going to slide the dado stop up to the blade, right at the front there, and you're going to make sure that one tooth of your blade is just barely touching leg number one of the dado stop. So now that we're just barely making contact with that one tooth of the saw blade, we can go ahead and calibrate our fence scale. So all you do is you just loosen your screws on the scale and you slide it until your cursor is right over the 3. All right, now our fence scale is calibrated to the saw blade. Remember, when you change blades, you could be changing to a different thickness blade, or it might even say that it's the same thickness, but it will cut a different size kerf. So you're going to want to make sure that this is calibrated every time you change your blade. Another great use for the dado stop is for when you're making crosscuts with your miter gauge. What this does is it creates space between your workpiece and your fence. You never ever want to register off the fence when you're making crosscuts with your miter gauge. What happens is when you're advancing your workpiece through the cut, if you're pushing it on this side, this off-cut piece becomes totally uncontrolled and there's no space between the blade and the fence. The fence is going to want to keep that piece up against the blade, and if it turns even just slightly, one of the teeth on this blade is going to catch that piece and it's going to shoot it back out at you. So you don't want that to happen, ever. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to template the kerf of our blade onto the setup gauge. So what you're going to want to do first is set your table saw fence to about 5 inches. This is a good size. And you're going to want to rip down a piece of MDF. If you have MDF, this is the best material to use when you're calibrating the dado stop. Okay, now that you have your scrap piece of MDF cut, we have a stop that is exactly flush with the fence side of the blade. So we'll be using the stop to register for the left side of the blade, and that will give us our actual kerf. What you do is you take a scrap piece of wood, you put it on your miter gauge, and you slide it up to about a ½ inch away from the stop that you cut earlier. After that, you take your setup gauge, put it on the table, and slide that all the way up to the stop. And the cut that you see here is going to represent the actual kerf of your blade, and that's how much material it takes out of your workpiece. Secure the setup gauge to your scrap piece of wood with the dovetail clamp provided. Okay, now once it's clamped down, make sure that your stop is all the way up against the fence and that your setup gauge is all the way up against the stop. Once you're all secure, put your safety glasses on, fire this bad boy up. Now with our kerf templated onto the setup gauge, we're going to calibrate our dado stop. You set it down on the table and you ride it up against the fence. You take the dovetail clamp that came in the package and you slide it into the back of the dado stop and secure it to the fence. Now, using the setup gauge that we just templated, set it down onto the table and slide it up against the dado stop. Then, take leg number 2 and slide it up to where it's touching where you just cut the kerf out. Now we're going to take our setup gauge and spin it 90 degrees, with the long side facing parallel to the fence. You put the material down on the table and slide it up against the setup gauge. You take leg number 3 and you move that up until it's touching that material. Okay, so now our dado stop is calibrated to the exact thickness of our inlay. Look at that. Next, we're going to set our blade height. Now, the easiest way to set your blade height to the depth of your dado cut is by lowering the blade to a little bit shorter than the height of your inlay, and using your miter gauge, you're going to cut it from the bottom. And every time you make a cut, you raise the blade a little bit more until the blade comes just at the top of your inlay, and you know that that's the depth of your dado cut. Now, if you're cutting your dado to make a half lap joint, the process is similar with just a minor difference. What you do is you start the blade a little lower than half of the height of your inlay, you make a cut, and then you flip it over, and you do the same thing. And every time you pass, you raise the blade height just a little bit until the cut on both sides meets at exactly the middle. And then you know that that's going to be halfway between one piece and the next. Now that our blade height is set, we're ready to cut our dado. Now you're going to want to measure where on your piece you want your dado cut to be. So let's say I want it 2 inches in. Remember, the dado stop is 3 inches long, so I'm going to set my scale to 5 inches so that the beginning of my cut is exactly 2 inches into the piece. You put your workpiece on your miter gauge and you slide it up to leg number 1, and that is going to be the fence side of the curve. And now the second cut, you slide your workpiece up to where it's touching leg number 3, and that's going to be the other side of your dado. Now you have both sides of your dado cut, and this should be the exact thickness of your inlay. So now all you have to do is just slide your piece a little bit and clear out the material in the middle.
The MATCHFIT Dado Stop Pro makes quick work of once complicated processes. Now that you've got the basics, get creative. Thanks for watching, and happy woodworking.
MICROJIG. Work safer. Work smarter.